Es war ein unruhiges Jahr.
So, a very difficult, tense end of the year here in Brussels. And December, we had the agreement on Brexit. And then a few weeks later, the CAI meaning the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. Today, I want to talk about this topic with Michael Hager, and my name is Hendrik Kafsack. We will take a look at the opportunities and the risks of this investment agreement today. Before we actually start, I would like to give the floor to Lucia Puttrich. I'm pleased to welcome you to another One Click to Europe event. First of all, my special thanks go to our today's speaker, Michael Hager, who is Head of Cabinet of the Executive VP and Commissioner of Trade, Valdis Dombrovskis. The EU trade policy, and especially its trade relations with China, are important topics for the state of Hesse. Geopolitical aspects play an ever-increasing role in commercial relations. The Commission is long since aware of this, and this awareness is clearly reflected in the work of the Trade Commissioner. The world order has changed, not only due to the rise of China, but also due to the COVID-19 crisis and its impacts. In my view, it has to be avoided that Europe ceases playing a major role in the competition between USA and China. The EU would do well to position itself strongly and more confidently. Therefore, I welcome the new approach of the European trade strategy, which was presented on 18th of February. This strategy is banking on a more intensive cooperation with other countries, among which the USA especially. However, it aims also at strengthening its cooperation with Africa and additional neighboring countries of the EU. China has been an important trade partner for the Hessian economy for a long time, which makes it particularly important for Hessian companies. Therefore, from my point of view, the opportunities and the risk of this trade agreement between the European Union and China offer a lot of topics to discuss during our event today. I'm therefore looking forward to an exciting speech and the ensuing debate. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will now give the floor back to Hendrik Kafsack. A warm welcome. Yes, I already mentioned it. We have exactly 45 minutes for our discussion regarding this investment agreement. You can ask your questions. We have our phone number 0032 472 030181, and you also can send your questions by email. Today I will discuss or be in discussion with Michael Hager, who is Head of Cabinet of the Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis. Late summer, autumn, beginning of autumn, he also started to be busy of trade policy. So really, he's very busy since he's also in charge of finance and different agreements. Mr. Hager, you are in Brussels for a very long time. You had a similar position under Commissioner Göttinger, so you really know the Brussels business. And therefore, I can say that you are the best partner, the best person for this discussion. Mr. Hager, when the agreement was reached end of last year, we could hear Peking really cheering up, and all the other countries were rather skeptical. On the other hand, on the one hand, were those who saying we have a point in human rights and the human rights issues, and the other hand was saying, okay, what would be the additional worth of it? So really, in a nutshell, what are the advantages? What is the interest of this agreement? It's clear that it's not a huge step, but we also have to manage our expectations. If we take a look at when the discussions started, like 7 years ago, we must state that there has been an evolution, and we have also to admit that we have a kind of gap regarding our relation with China. And it is very important to make steps in the right direction. And this agreement will not fill the glass, but it allows us to fill this gap, at least partially. And I think this agreement covers certain topics unmentioned until now, and where the Chinese side had to agree, for instance, regarding sustainability. Okay, we might start with the geopolitical aspects before entering in the different topics. Critics were saying, okay, we will have a new American president who clearly stated that he wants to establish a European-US trade strategy against China. So why, a few weeks before the inauguration, Europe had to take this initiative and make Washington doubt about our common strategy? Yeah. Our trade strategy mentions it very clearly. Europe is able to act alone. We are not the appendix of the United States, and this agreement shows and clearly highlights that we are able to follow our own strategy. These negotiations lasted for 7 years, so the conclusion must not come as a surprise. And the United States have also made an agreement under Trump, not as far-reaching as CAI, but nobody asked us whether we were in favor of it or not. So it's really a question of European independency, which does not mean that we will not discuss with our like-minded, okay, with our friends. We have our World Trade Organizations and other frameworks where we will try to cover the lacks of the Chinese system. And I think our Chinese agreement is rather a contribution to the solution of these problems. We are showing the different possibilities. We are showing that the Chinese are willing and able to talk to us. And I think that this can be continued with our partners. Okay, so as we said, the Chinese were cheering, and regarding the US, China said, okay, we have been able to show that we can work against the Americans. But is this really an agreement against the US? I think that this investment agreement does not prevent us from addressing different topics with the United States. And we do not want to do things alone, but we have to show that we are able to make agreements on our own. And I think this agreement is an illustration of that. Am I right? Germany was in charge of the Council presidency, and was this very important for Germany? And if we take a look at France, France was not very positive about this agreement. Is it a really European agreement, or is it an agreement under a German presidency? Let me be very clear. It was the Commission that was in charge of these negotiations, and there was no German negotiation partner involved. So, and now different factors explain the final agreement, but I am convinced the member states entitled us to run these negotiations, and I believe that these member states are still on board, and we have made sure that the member states are also in favor of this last momentum. So now classifying it as a German initiative would be wrong. Okay, it took place under the German presidency, so we must not say that it's only a German initiative. Okay, now human rights. We will not be talking only about human rights during the next half an hour, but it's a very important issue since we have to talk about the Uyghurs who have to work in under very difficult conditions. And there the question is, how can we make pressure on countries who, or that, let people work in forced labor camps? So I think we first have to examine which tool is the right tool for which action, okay? And our investment agreement has a certain purpose. And if we take a look at its content, then we see that we are already beyond the classical investment issues. And of course, the topic of human rights is a very important one, as has been stated during the conclusion and during the final video conference. Okay? So now, no doubt here. But the question is, will we be able to solve this topic via an investment agreement, or will we not conclude this agreement since we have this human rights issue? I think both topics must be separated. In my opinion, for the first time, we have an agreement of the Chinese that the ratification of the International Agreement on Labor Rights will follow. This is something that is quite new. Then, regarding forced labor and the question whether we are able to solve this human rights issue and forced labor issue via this investment agreement is not the right question.
Also die Arbeitsnormen, um die es da geht, die Zwangsarbeit letztlich verbieten, um es mal so ins Unreine zu formulieren. Die Chinesen sagen, wir gehen.
The Chinese say we make an effort. This, of course, is a classical formulation. And making efforts can also mean doing nothing, only tempting something. Wouldn't that be the danger, that the Chinese say or pretend to make an offer and ultimately don't do anything? And of course we would require concrete steps. Just in the way of an example, for instance, the ratification of the ILO conventions. Well, this concerns the question we have with Korea. And with regard to dispute regulation, we have made clear that we require steps and implementations. And the panel condemned Korea because Korea didn't do anything either. And this shows that the mechanism works out. Korea eventually took the necessary steps. It waited for the panel, but nevertheless they were submitted to a high pressure. And of course we'll have to see how the Chinese are going to react. And they committed themselves, and it's going to be difficult to do nothing at all. Dispute regulation also concerns those aspects in the agreement. I had understood that when we talk about sustainability, the tool isn't that sharp to say it in that way. The tool doesn't allow for retaliations, which could be possible, but through the panel and through increased pressure, there will be a need for action, and Korea shows that such a mechanism can work. But of course we'll have to look at the Chinese, at the concrete steps they will take. But deviating from this or avoiding those situations won't be possible. And of course there will be stringent observations and monitoring. The aspect of forced labor is, of course, another one which would require other tools. We have spoken about one facet, and it's not only about the bottle opener. We also need a hammer. We even have a full range of hammers. We have been talking about global tools with regards to human rights, which allow for sanctions. The member states or a commissioned body would be allowed to apply sanctions. That, of course, is one opportunity which we can envisage. Second, we'll have a legislation, a European legislation about the supply chain, which will encompass human rights and which is going to make sure that we won't have products coming from forced labor. And of course, we have to go over to quite a sharp tool which is going to deal with that topic. Maybe we could even go beyond this legislation concerning supply chains. The Parliament requires to be able to forbid the import of those products. Is this a concern on which the Commission is reflecting upon? Of course, we can do quite a lot of things through this legislation about the supply chain. It all concerns the shaping of this legislation. To what extent can we go? It is also about legal provisions. We maybe first have to look how it can work out before elaborating other ideas. Maybe we can stick to the elements encompassed in that legislation, and maybe we can build on them. This sounds more intense. Would that mean that we would await for this legislation concerning the supply chain before taking further steps? We can already take the steps in the framework of the supply chain regulation if we have the necessary political will. It allows for excluding certain imports. And of course, we'll have to see whether we have the required political will or whether we want a separate legal instrument to tackle that issue, a ban for imports according to human rights violations or according to other issues. While you talk about the political will, which is quite an important element, the European Parliament took quite a clear position But when it comes to the member states, the situation is different. Is there a political will among the member states regarding the political situation in China? I'm also thinking of the Navalny case. When the tool was adopted in December, it was said immediately, this is not going to be applied to China. And of course, we need the approval of all the member states. When the tool was developed, it was said it is never going to be applied. And after a few weeks, we have the first case. And in the coming weeks and months, we'll see what the tool is able to. And of course, we have to look at the political will. We, of course, need a consensus to use the tool properly. The tool exists. We have the first case, and we have to look at further developments. And why not apply this to China? This sounds as a theoretical discussion to me. Well, we'll have to wait. It's the first time that we discuss about the topic. We're talking about persons and human beings and not yet about import bans, just to make that clear regarding the framework of our discussion. We have a Hessian member of the European Parliament who has asked a question. Protection of minorities, Uyghurs. He asks the fundamental question, why China and not Taiwan? We all know the Chinese policy conducted over there. Isn't that a little bit awkward with regard to the EU to come to that agreement with China, despite the problems concerning Taiwan? We have different trade agreements. They are not global. We're talking about certain states, Mercosur, Association of States also. And regarding China, we got the mandate 7 years ago from the Council. And this mandate doesn't concern Taiwan. I think that it makes sense that those negotiations can take some years, some time. And it is in our interest to drive forward such negotiations. Regarding Taiwan, I don't exclude any investment agreement. But first of all, we would have to look at the agreement with China, which would have to implement, to ratify also. And then we can look at Taiwan, with whom we have contacts. Last autumn, we had a nice conference concerning investments on both sides. So we don't have to start at zero. We do have contacts. The exchange is happening place, and we also have ideas, and we could build on this with regards to the future. Let us look at the contents of the agreements, besides the questions concerning sustainability, which are, of course, important. When we talk about an investment agreement, we first and foremost think of the protection of investment. I'm thinking of disputes between investors or the states which are not part of this agreement. And why not? And would there still be a gap to close over here regarding investment protection? We have our own ideas which are not being shared by everyone. And overloading the agreement by the protection of investments would have taken further years, certainly. But within the CAI, we are optimistic that in 2 years of time, we could close that gap. So we are not going to lose sight of that. We generated a reasonable package. We are driving forward certain issues, and in parallel, we are going to continue our negotiations for 2 more years. Regarding TTIP, do you think that the Europeans will be able to push through their model? I'm thinking of CETA also. Things have moved a little, but not globally. And how about the Chinese? And therefore, I said it would have taken some more years. The question is, to what extent can we sell our model, and how our trade partner is going to react? And of course, there will be further and tough discussions, and we'll have to cover other topics. But I don't think that this is going to be determining for businesses. We have further elements concerning businesses, state aids. I think that all this is more important.
Now, I have to ask another question with a slightly different direction, but it's a question of Nicole Kleb regarding this law on supply chains. And this question I would like to ask before we start our talks about the level playing field. The question is the political responsibility regarding the law on supply chains. Is this responsibility put on the companies, and wouldn't it be very difficult to control it at an international, global level? This is the kind of implementation and application of this law. We have the reporting obligations of the company, and this is one example showing that things can work like this. Okay, then we have the NGOs, the civil societies, all these parts are very interested in this. So it's not an attempt to shift responsibilities. I think that, of course, both sides have to take their responsibility. The states, the authorities on the one side, but also the companies that are active in the different countries, okay? Now it's about shared responsibility and about making sure that human rights will be respected on spot. And we will take different actions in order to support our values and promote our values. Okay, now let me get back to the level playing field. As you said regarding China, one question is also what about subsidies of state companies? What about market access? I only have market access, or I get market access if I share my knowledge with the Chinese side. All these topics are mentioned under CAI, but does CAI also propose a solution for these topics? Once again, I think it's a really important step. It's the first time that the Chinese make these concessions, that they take into account our worries, okay? And now this technological transfer, also regarding the joint ventures, will be stopped, will be diminished. Regarding the subsidies, we will have the obligation for more transparency, no more favors for state companies. Okay, and now the question is, how will this be implemented? How will this be applied? But now we have seen the will to make a step towards Europe, and this will help us to continue into this direction and to better adapt our current model. And when those who are working with China for a very long time say, okay, it's very nice to see all this on paper, but finally the Chinese don't care about it, what will actually happen? Okay, if you take a skeptical and a pessimist approach, we should not conclude this kind of trade agreement, then it might be better to say, okay, no agreement at all. I believe if we want to talk and to find an agreement with our international partners, we have to try to find out where are the problems. Okay, but finally, there must be some confidence, otherwise nobody would sign this agreement. And I think this agreement has so many new points, covers so many new topics that first of all, we should wait and see what will happen, and then we can listen to the critics. Now regarding the subsidies, which brings us to the point of increased transparency. Okay, but actually, it does not solve the problem. It only gives us some ammunition to talk about it. Okay, so there is no general rule, there is no general framework. It's just admitting that we know that we are not treated in the same way. Yes, but we are currently working on a project regarding these subsidies. We had the white book a certain time ago, and during the first half year of 2021, we will have a legislative proposition. And our toolbox will not stop here. We are still working on it. Okay. Then we still have the action at WTO level. Okay, once again, it's not a huge step. It's a small step forward. And now this transparency step can be pushed forward at WTO level. Now regarding the joint ventures. There is now the obligation to make a joint venture, there is the obligation to make a joint venture with a Chinese company before having access to the market. Okay, and now this agreement only fixes what the Chinese had agreed on anyway. No, we go one step further, okay? There is a kind of liberalization taking place for a few years now, and now we put some additional points into our agreement, like electromobility, very important for European companies. Yeah, and regarding this topic, we have reached a market access for our companies. The same goes for the private hospitals, cloud service technologies. All these points are new. And of course, this has to be implemented, but actually it's a break. It's in the restrictive framework. Okay. There are different questions from our audience. I will come back to these questions later. Okay, now the question is, what did the EU give to China besides the political success the Chinese were jubilating? Okay, it's always about the access to the energy market, but actually it's the fixation of a status quo. Yes, as I said, indeed, it's about filling the gap. It was not the idea of increasing the gap, okay? Now, the concessions of the European Commission are really at a very, very minor level. It's regarding the renewables, but we fixed our limits, we fixed our caps, so it's really a minimum concession, okay? It's a kind of face saving. So in order to say we have made some concessions too, but it's not really significant. Now I will try to ask the 3 questions I really find very interesting. So, okay, these questions, let me start with Heinrich Klopp, working at the permanent representation of Niedersachsen. Okay, we see that the EU part in the global BIP is steadily dwindling. And now the question is how many time we have left in order to not become politically dependent from China or to have to pay a high price for strategic autonomy. Okay, I think we must not minimize Europe. Europe continues to be a really important player regarding economy, trade, and so on. And our activity at global level in the WTO and in our free trade agreements shows that we are actually making use of this role. But of course, the evolution continues, and our trade framework, our BIP, will not stop. And now it's up to us to make sure that we will not be left behind. We must create the conditions for our own competitiveness, and their trade is a very significant tool. And without trade agreements and free trade, our competitiveness will not be maintained. So I think free trade is the direction to be continued, and we need partners to realize these agreements. And then we have our toolbox, and we must use that toolbox in order to be able to protect us should this be needed. Talking about China, we have been talking about our relationship with the United States, about our solidarity with the US. The question is, will the EU have to pay the price for a conflict? I'm thinking about the trade structure. The trade structure EU-China is quite different from the trade structure between the US and China. And when there comes a conflict, will you have to pay the price for the US?
Die eigene Aufstellung und man nennt es offene Strategie.
That was our idea. We sometimes talk about an open, autonomous strategy or whatsoever. If I take into account our capacity to interact with other international partners, I don't have the impression that our position is threatened. But of course we need those trade agreements on a sound and fair and balanced basis regarding our economic model and our orientation towards experts. We have done well so far. Also, with regard to the current COVID-19 crisis, trade has played a part here. As you have been talking about Green Deal, I make a transition to Nicola's question, which concerns the Green Deal. To what extent the investment agreement can drive forward the way to achieving the Green Deal objectives? And to what extent do we need CO2 border adjustment measures? 2 weeks ago, we made this clear within our trade strategy. Trade can play a role when it comes to boosting the green transition. But of course, it's not the only tool, and it cannot compensate all the deficits caused by other tools. and regarding the investment agreement with China and the chapters concerning sustainability, well, we notice that we achieve progress, that we attach importance to those topics, and we are ready to pay the price, a certain price for that. And regarding China, we, of course, see the link to the Agreement of Paris, for which China is ready to deliver. I'm thinking of the green mobility. Regarding the field of traffic, we are ready to make an international contribution, and the Chinese see this likewise. The carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM, as we say here in Brussels. Well, first of all, we would have to look at the right model. There are different possibilities. We can talk about a border tax, or we can also talk about an external ETS. We can envisage different designs. It all depends on the reactions. I don't think that the Chinese are going to react in a negative way. We already have conducted discussions about this regarding ETS. The Chinese already have taken several steps, so that could be a model. It is not about rejecting what we suggest. It is about avoiding carbon leakage. And to strike the right balance, it's not going to be easy. Also, with regard to the compatibility towards WTO rules. Sandra Party from the German Institute for Businesses from Cologne asks the question whether the Chinese are going to stick to that treaty. And she refers to Central and Eastern European countries. And she mentions that sometimes the conclusion of treaties is always being postponed, as, for instance, with regards to nuclear power plants. I don't know this specific case. I'm not convinced by this format 17+1. We shouldn't fall into that trap. The investment agreement underlines our approach, i.e. that we are going to fully use our toolbox. We are going to use the existing instruments, investment screenings, investments which are going to be taken in Europe. Maybe we are going to prohibit the one or other investment. We have protection measures regarding anti-dumping. The fact that the Chinese have to stick to the agreement is, of course, something very important. As said, I don't know the specific case this person refers to, but we are submitted to certain regulations in Europe, and we are going to respect them. Bernhard Kissner from the Hessian Ministry for Economics. Many businesses are already established. 900 Chinese businesses are active in Hessen. And to what extent this agreement is going to improve their business relations? Investments in China are going to be made easier. The access to markets is going to be facilitated. Therefore, there are new opportunities which have been created. The Chamber for Foreign Trade can, of course, boost all this and stimulate all this. Dear Mr. Hager, thank you very much for that interview. I don't know whether we have convinced all critical voices and purses. If you missed our interview, you have the opportunity to watch it afterwards. You can look at our live stream later on. I would like to indicate another event which is going to take place on the 16th of March. We'll have a discussion about social policy, European social policy, and we are going to look afterwards at the election results in the Netherlands. We're going to look what is going to happen to Mr. Rutte. Thank you very much indeed.